Welcome to our virtual History and Heritage Walk here at Ferry Meadows. We'll be highlighting some of the historical features found across the park, some of which can be found on this iconic sculpture. We'll be doing a circular route around the park, stopping at various points of interest. I hope you enjoy and learn something new. We start our history walk just past the visitor centre at Coney Meadow, which sits at the heart of Ferry Meadows. Nowadays, these big expansive meadows are used by dog walkers and families for picnics and ball games and for numerous activities and events. But this meadow hides an interesting historical past. This area is known as the Lynch Farm Complex. Did you know that an archaeological dig during the 1970s, along with crop mark interpretation and a more recent geophysical survey, have indicated that these meadows were the location of a large Iron Age farmstead and Roman cemetery? The farmstead features were originally spotted from the air, and then excavators found a courtyard and an enclosed paddock with 50 burials. We think that the farm and cemetery were in use at the same time. We do know that the people buried here were ordinary farm workers whose bones show many signs of a tough life, such as arthritis and heel fractures. The people buried are likely to include several closely related people who shared a genetic bone abnormality of the arm joint. Several burials were those of children. For a modern child, many illnesses can be simply cured with antibiotics or a routine operation. Sadly, there was little these Roman Britons could do to heal fever and infection. Looking across Coney Meadow now, just imagine what it might have looked like around 2,000 years ago when it was a busy Iron Age farmstead. We now move across from Coney Meadow to Roman Point. During the gravel extraction and creation of the lakes in the 1970s, archaeologists uncovered the foundation of a large oiled barn. The Peterborough Development Corporation decided to alter the plan of the lake to preserve the barn's foundation for public display, which can be seen today along with an interpretation panel. The barn is the most impressive of a series of farm outbuildings that once stood within the wider Lynch Farm complex. It was a timber building on a stone base. It was probably used much as a barn is today for storing crops and tools, as well as being a workshop for metalworking and salt production. People may have lived in the building too, due to evidence of hearth fires. The layout of the Roman point structures show that as well as the barn, there is what may have been a small temple, as well as an earlier military ditch. The military ditch was created before the farm, when the area was probably used for training by the 9th Legion that were based just across the river at Longthorpe Fortress, which we'll talk about later. As we move through Ferry Meadows, many of the heritage features still visible in the park are connected to the Milton estate. The Fitzwilliam family once owned the land that was to become Ferry Meadows and collected rents from tenant farmers who worked the fields. These paintings by William van der Hagen and Humphrey Repton give a sense of what Ferry Meadows looked like during the Georgian era. In both these paintings, we can see the subject of our next stop. The impressive landmark of Milton Ferry Bridge was built by Lord Fitzwilliam in 1716. It goes without saying that this handsome bridge is a local treasure and a great favourite with photographers now. The bridge is both a Grade 2 listed structure and a scheduled monument. It was built from local Barnet limestone and marks the site of the old Gunners Wade Ferry, which is where Ferry Meadows, Milton Ferry Bridge and Gunwade Lake all take their names. The bridge was an important crossing point on the Nene, connecting the south bank of the river with the Great North Road to London, which could be joined at Alwalton. There was a toll payable to make the crossing, much to the disgust of Robinson Crusoe author Daniel Defoe, who wrote the following about his experience.
Near this little village of Castor lives the Lord Fitzwilliams. His lordship has lately built a very fine stone bridge over the river Nene, near Gunworth, where formerly was the ferry. I was very much applauding this generous action of my lord's, knowing the inconvenience of the passage there before, especially if the waters of the Nene were but a little swelled, and I thought it a piece of public charity. But my applause was much abated when coming to pass the bridge, Being in a coach, we could not be allowed to go over it without paying 2 shillings 6 pence. Of which I shall say only this, that I think 'tis the only half-crown toll that is in Britain, at least, that I have ever met with.
The bridge continued to charge the same toll of 2 shillings and 6 pence right up until 1964, before it was stopped as the use of the bridge declined, before closing to traffic completely when the development of the new A47 and the creation of Ferry Meadows. Next we head towards Bluebell Wood and see the osier beds. Osier is a species of willow and was grown here in order to supply willow for the large basket making industry that once flourished in the area. Before the widespread adoption of plastics and other modern materials, woven willow products such as baskets were very important in industry and farming. Willow has the ability to annually regrow stems once its stump has been cut, making it a valuable and sustainable resource. The process of cutting the stump or stool is called coppicing. As you can see, the willow stalls in the osier beds are grown close together in ordered rows, which makes them easier to coppice. The strong, flexible stems that are harvested can then be used for weaving. During the 19th century, osier beds were grown along the south bank of the River Nene from Ferry Meadows eastwards as far as Wharf Road in Woodston, where there was a basket weaving factory. Although the demand for willow to make woven products has now all but disappeared, the osier beds are still coppiced and managed in the same way to preserve this important piece of heritage. As we continue into Bluebell Wood, you will notice the commemorative sculpture on your left, carved in 1999 by Jason Thompson, and is a reminder that the pool you see next to it was an old sheep wash. The practice of sheep washing was an important part of the local agricultural calendar from the 15th to mid-19th century. Many hundreds of sheep were grazed in the flood meadows under direction of the Milton estate. Each year, estate workers would have herded the sheep over Milton Ferry Bridge and individually washed them in the purpose-dug sheep wash. This was hard, dirty work that would have kept all available hands very busy. Once clean, the sheep would spend several days drying off in Milton Park before shearing. During the late 19th century, it became standard practice to clean all fleeces at the woolen mills, and by the early 20th century, most sheep washes had fallen into disuse. By the 1950s, the practice had disappeared in all parts of the country. As we continue down the path, almost immediately to the right, we come to our next stop. As with the sheep wash, little remains today to mark the site where the Fitzwilliam family had their boathouse. The stone foundations have been preserved, but the building itself, being made from timber and a thatched roof, eventually fell into disuse and has long since been lost. A photograph from the early 1900s shows that there were in fact 2 boathouses next to each other and gives an interesting glimpse of the past. The 18th century painting by Humphrey Repton also shows what is probably an earlier and grander boathouse in the same approximate location. Reflecting on these images, we can imagine generations of Fitzwilliams and their guests enjoying leisurely boating parties or picnics by the river. A little further down the path and to the right, we come to the Mount. The Mount is a small man-made hill sited to enjoy the views over the Nene to Milton Ferry Bridge and beyond. Mounts were common in estate gardens in Georgian times and provided a higher vantage point to take in and admire the estate grounds. The construction of the Mount in Bluebell Wood may have been a means of putting to good use the spoil excavated during the digging of the sheep wash. Several large yew trees that grace the Mount today may also be the legacy of outgrown topiary from the time. It would be easy to imagine Lord Fitzwilliam and his family stopping here for picnics to show off their wealth to aristocratic guests, with impressive views of their extensive estate, along with structures such as Milton Ferry Bridge in the background. As we head towards the end of Bluebell Wood, we head further back in time again to the Roman era. We're walking along the 750 metre long boardwalk which runs along the river. It was constructed in 2019 by Neem Park volunteers and has made this part of the park so much more accessible to all. A 27-acre fortress was discovered in 1961 on the ridge of Thorpe Wood Golf Course beyond Bluebell Wood. It is believed that the fortress was built in a hurry around 43 to 44 AD at the start of the Roman invasion as forces pressed their frontier north. The fortress housed barracks, headquarters, granaries and storehouses, and occupied land on the ridge above the Nene facing the river. It was designed to hold about half a legion and is called a vexillation fortress. Around 2,400 men may have been stationed there as part of the Roman 9th Legion. We know that the 9th Legion was sent to put down the Boudiccan rebellion after the Celts had burned Colchester down to the ground. The Romans of the 9th Legion were soundly defeated by Boudicca's forces and limped back to Longthorpe with heavy casualties. We can see this in the archaeology, as in the early 60s AD, the Longthorpe fortress was rapidly remodelled to accommodate a much smaller force. Walls they could no longer defend were pulled down and a smaller perimeter was established that could be manned by their depleted force. As we head back towards the visitor centre and towards the end of our walk, we can take in the more recent history of Ferry Meadows. Between 1971 and 1977, 5 million tonnes of gravel were removed from this site in order to build all the new infrastructure needed for the development and expansion of Peterborough as a new town. In the 1970s, there was no significant public green space, so the Peterborough Development Corporation planned from the outset to address its situation by securing the corridor of floodplain adjacent to the River Nene for parkland and recreational use. The gravel extraction was planned to create the best possible lakes and landscape features for the site's future use as a country park. All these lakes were man-made in the 1970s, but they now look as though they've always been here. You can see in these photographs the extent of the works and may even be able to recognise a few of the features today, even though much has changed as the park has matured. Once the gravel extraction was completed, an intensive period of restoration and construction began. The footpath network was completed, drainage, water and electricity were laid, and shrub and tree planting was started. A cafe, visitor centre and public toilets were built, and the park officially opened to the public in 1978. By 1988, the Peterborough Development Corporation was disbanded and stewardship of the park passed to the newly formed Neem Park Trust.
Thank you for joining us on this virtual history and heritage walk. We hope you enjoyed it and learnt something new. Why not come along to Ferry Meadows and see some of these fascinating historical sites for yourself? Thanks for watching.